it goes to the heart. If you look at the history of the Enlightenment, if you look at Kant and the great philosophers and the great scientists up to the last 200 years, the issue of this, all this creation, evolution, and all this, it all comes down to rationality and how we understand rationality, and whose position is most rational. And and so if we can't really grapple with this question of the nature of rationality, because that's the key. Because when I'm listening to you debating, what you're doing is you want to explain things in a rational way, and you believe that your position is a more rational position, and I respect that position, and so this issue of logic and the nature of logic is not just a philosophical pie in the sky, or it is a very deep debate, which you're correct to say that, and I think that's really right to say that. But Bernie, when you look at your side of the equation, when you look at your scholars and thinkers, and you look at our side and whatever, personally, this is my own thinking, reading the history of the Enlightenment, is it all comes down to ultimately whose understanding of rationality is the best. Because these debates about DNA, the complexity of DNA, and then the rejoinders that you make with your arguments of using DNA and the similarities between apes and humans, and all these arguments that you're using, you're bringing in rationality and trying to understand things in a rational way. So this is a very important topic. I'm not using this as some would use to get away from evidential stuff, because if you say to me, Jay, okay, let's have a debate on evolution, if you give me a few weeks on it, I'll do the research for you, and I'll look at, you send me the papers and I'll read it. But I think it is an important topic, and you are right, it is quite deep. But I think that I need to engage in it more, and I think also you need to engage in it more, bro.
Well, let me give my opinion is the question doesn't matter at all, because we have an agreement that rationality is important, logic and reason is important. So we already have a common ground. So from my perspective, what we need to do is move forward. And for example, when I talk to Kent Hovind, he's a young earth creationist. He says there's no evidence for evolution. I say there is evidence for evolution. So we have common ground of logic and reason. The whole debate is over the evidence. It has nothing to do with where did logic come from. Another thing I want to say about what you said is, you said you have your side, I have my side, but there's no such thing when it comes to evolution, because you can find evangelical Christians like Francis Collins. In fact, most of the scientists, even if they're religious, they accept evolution. So evolution is not an atheistic thing. There is no your side. There is no Christian side to evolution. There's a lot of Christians that accept evolution.
Okay, I think if I can come back at you, that is that my expertise is historical Jesus studies, not in evolution like you and stuff like that. And in historical Jesus studies, there's a guy called Dominic Crossan who's a skeptic, and he was challenged by James White, and James White said there are presuppositions that we have to put on the table, and he said, and in his Irish accent, he said, yeah, but there's data, he said. So he's agreeing with you there in terms of there's data that we've got to look at, and there is common ground, but there is a complex interplay between evidences and our presuppositions. There is that complex interplay, and so yes, there is common ground, but at the same time we do have to look at the nature of evidence, and I would totally agree. We also have to be aware that we come to the evidences with different colored glasses, that you come to the evidence with your atheist glasses, I come to my evidence with Christian glasses, the Hindu comes to it with their glasses. So there is evidences, and we can share common ground, but we have to be careful that we do come into it with biases. And like, for example, you've been on record on one of your videos of saying that you are, I think, is it a philosophical naturalist or or something like that. Yeah. So you're on record saying that. Now that is an important philosophical construct to the way you're going to view evidences.
Okay, but here's something that totally undermines everything you've just said. I was raised a Catholic, and then in college I became a born-again evangelical Christian. For over 25 years, I was a born-again evangelical Christian, growing in the faith, even went to seminary and got a seminary degree. So for me, it's not about, I'm waiting for the video to catch up here. For me, it's not about presuppositions, because I had that belief. I would have remained a Christian if I could still have enough to believe in. I didn't think there was still a thread of enough to grasp onto to believe in.
But we can also catch presuppositions like we can catch the measles. You know, you can have one presupposition and then it can be undermined by another presupposition. So we, you know, things can come in. You know, it's, you know, it depends what culture you're in and how, you know, if you're going to a university and you're listening to lecturers, you could catch the presuppositions without you realizing it. But the point is, what the issue is here, the important issue is, all I'm saying is that this issue about logic and the nature of logic exposes certain philosophical constructs within your presuppositions and mine, and it's about whether your presupposition matches the reality of what you're saying or what I'm saying.
Okay, let me tell you something. Have you heard of, there's a logical fallacy called confirmation bias? Do you know what that is?
I have, but you'll have to refresh me. I've just did a lot of logical fallacies today.
Yeah, so confirmation bias, it doesn't seem like a logical fallacy, because usually logical fallacies have to do with bad logic, but I've seen it listed as a logical fallacy. So basically, confirmation bias means you believe something, and then when you look at the evidence, you try to interpret it in light of what you believe.
Yeah.
And what you should do is try to look at evidence more impartially based on what makes the most facts. And when I was a Christian, my presupposition was I wanted to believe. I did not want to leave the faith. When I became an atheist, it was bad news for me. It was a depressing way to go, but I figured I had to pick the truth over what feels good. So I did not want to leave the faith. My presupposition was for Christianity, but I was open-minded and I wanted to follow the truth, and so I had to go against my presupposition at that point. And basically, I don't even like the word presupposition, because it sounds like the same thing as confirmation bias. This is a bad thing. Presuppositions are a bad thing in science and logic.
Well, I would disagree. I think you can't discuss the nature of evidence without discussing the nature of presuppositions. For example, if you look at the history of historical Jesus studies, Renan came to the life of Christ with his trying to be objective and scientific in his understanding of Christ. Strauss tried to do the same. Bultmann's tried to do the same, but Bultmann created a Jesus in his existential philosophy. Strauss created a Jesus in his German philosophy, and Renan created a Jesus out of his French philosophy. And so,
and then you had Muhammad, and then you also had Muhammad and Joseph Smith later making more Jesuses too.
Bernie, but the point is that they did what you're saying. They tried to look at it scientifically and objectively, but in the end, they created a Jesus out of their own image. So what I'm saying is, I totally agree with in historical Jesus studies. Data is important. I don't disagree with that. I don't discount that. And I know that you get frustrated when creationists maybe use presuppositional apologetics to get away from looking at the data. So I appreciate what you're saying there. But I think at a higher philosophical level, if you read books like Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, where he's grappling with evidences and presuppositions, you'll find that you cannot get away from this issue of presuppositions. It's not a case of just confirmation bias. It's about looking at your presuppositions and saying whether they comport to reality. And your presupposition that that logic is immaterial does not comport with your naturalistic position, because you know that you believe that the brain is a material object. And how does that work within your position? And it's no good just saying it's all about confirmation bias, let's move on to data. But we can go on to another topic if you want. I think we've exhausted this one.
Well, it seems to me like you're mixing some things up too. When you talk about trying to prove logic, that's the thing is, like I said, we have a starting point. We agree about logic. We're not trying to disagree over whether logic is good or bad or how it works. We agree to basic logic. I personally think most of the problems with young Earth creationists like Kent Hovind, for example, is he is scientifically naive. Like, I asked him if he knew about fused human chromosome number 2, and then he said yes, and we talked about it, and then it became obvious he didn't know the argument. So, you know, he says there's no evidence for evolution, and I asked another apologist about this, and he said he wasn't really familiar with these arguments. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not really an apologetics. You're not even in the game until you understand the evidence for evolution. You cannot say there's no evidence for evolution without being aware of the evidence. And the evidence is really quite deep, and it's quite amazing, and it's out there. It's not like it's a hidden secret or something. There's tons of evidence out there on so many different levels, on DNA, on biodiversity. There's just so much science out there, and it's really true that in order to not understand it, to not accept that, you have to be naive, I think, scientifically.
But even if I granted you all that you say is correct, you would still undermine your position, because your position is rationality. You're trying to be rational. And if you're trying to be rational, you're doing science and presenting arguments and evidence and saying that there's a solid position here, but so I grant you your argument, and even if I grant you that argument, you still don't get there to where you want to go. And that is that you're using rationality, and that rationality cannot be explained in your worldview. So, well, okay, even if I granted you your argument, your own argument would implode on itself, because your argument is clear, logical arguments, yeah? So if I grant you that, it would actually implode upon yourself, because how do you get logic, how do you get rationality from nature, from natural selection and mutation, which is not rational? How does that comport with your position?
Okay, so just to back up a little bit, are we in agreement about the laws of logic, that they exist?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So really the question is, where do the laws of logic come from, and does that require a designer? That's what your argument is, right?
No, my argument is that if you're positing rationality, how you want to